worry, you have clicked on the right video. This is a video focused on the Polar Verity Sense in a swim context, but I had to try and grab when I can make these videos when I can. So yeah, I'm out on my bike today. On my way to a coach session, doing some drills with the club, but I've got to grab these videos when I can. So, just as a starter for this video, let me explain one little thing. This is not a review. This is more observations. I really am not someone like Raymaker or DC Raymaker or Matt Legrand, who do all these amazing technical reviews and are absolutely phenomenal at it because they understand a lot about the mathematics. The pure reason why I bought the Verity Sense was because I feel that we have a lot of physiological data in terms of running and riding a bike. We know about our power and our heart rate, and we know about all sorts of things like that in terms of running and cycling. Morning. Morning. But I don't think we know so much about our physiological data to do with swimming. We know about our paces and distances and how far we've swum and what our CSS is and stuff like that, but physiologically I think we're a little bit limited as to what we actually know about those things. So I've always been very interested in heart rate relating to swim, and I have had straps, heart rate straps, the Garmin ones, and I've always found them to be an absolute disaster, frankly. So I thought when I saw Cody Miller's video where he was saying about how he and the club use this Verity Sense, it looked great, I have to say. I really like the idea of it being on the forehead, picking it optically. So I got one, and so I thought I'd try a couple of experiments to see sort of how accurate it is. What I particularly like is the fact that I can connect it to my Garmin, my Phoenix, whilst I'm swimming and see some data. So all I'm going to look at in this video are 3 little experiments that I've done, and some observations based off of those as to, first of all, its sort of accuracy really, and secondly, how best to use it to get some insight into your swimming. So let's get into it. So the first thing I did was pretty straightforward and simple. I went to the pool and did a CSS test. I'm sure most of you know what one of those are. It's a good way of measuring your threshold speed and giving you training paces for your swims. And you do a flat out 400, and you recover, and you do a flat out 200, and then you put those numbers into a calculator, and it tells you what your CSS or threshold pace should be. So I went and did that, and the setup for that was straightforward. I had a Verity Sense on my goggle strap, on my temple, my right temple, and it was storing in swim mode, which meant the data was storing directly onto the Verity Sense, and it was also connected to my Phoenix, which meant I could see what my heart rate was whilst I was swimming. Let's have a look at the data that I got from that session. Okay, so here we've got the data in front of us from DC Raymaker's amazing analyzer, and as you can see, there's definitely a semblance of tracking going on here. They look similar. So what we've got here at the first bit up until about 15 minutes, 15 and a half minutes, is the warm up, and then we've got the 400 best effort, and then 2 minutes recovery, and then we've got the 200 best effort, and then a little bit of a swim down. That's pretty much the session that I did. But as you can see from the different colours on here, the kind of light blue that we're tracking here, you can see lower portion of here, but then weirdly goes higher here. And then reads lower and then higher and then really low, but definitely tracks is the Verity Sense is stored on board. So that was where I set it off and had it on my temple, and the data was being recorded onto it. There was it wasn't recording being sent anywhere, whereas with the Garmin, it was coming from the sensor to my Garmin, and that's the data that's in the purple colour. So there's definitely good data coming through, and it looks pretty accurate. And if I'm honest with you, with a 400 best effort, I'd imagine probably that the Verity that's recording on board is probably the more accurate here. Getting all the way up to, 180 here, that sounds very high to me. But then at the same time, the information that's being sent to the Garmin stays very flat throughout the 400, which doesn't sound right to me. So, promising start, but there's definitely issues. So I sent that session to Matt Legrand and said, hey look, it looks like the info that was going to the Garmin wasn't as accurate as the Verity. or vice versa. I can't work out which one's more accurate, but there's definitely a discrepancy. And so Matt, and massive thanks to Matt, because he's so knowledgeable about these things, suggested that I try and put it up against another heart rate sensor at the same time. So I went and did a club swim session, and after a warm-up we had a best effort 200, then a load of kick drills, and then 4 100s best effort at the end. So you should be able to see that on the graph in a minute. The setup for that was the same as it was to begin with. It was the swim mode Polar Verity Sense, which meant it was recording on board. It was also connected to my Garmin Fenix, so the data was going to that at the same time. And I also had my Polar H10, which has the ability through the Polar Flow or Polar Beat app to record swim data internally. Let's have a look at the data from that swim.
Okay, so here's swim 2. What you can see on the screen here are 3 heart rate sensors. The ones that are close together are the Verity either recording on board or the Verity being sent here. Now, if you look at those closely, you'll see it tracks so much better than it did in the first swim. I mean, the profile's still there, and they're much closer together. This random purple line that you can see was the H10 recording onto itself via the Polar Flow app. Not great data there. Now, what you can see is a warm-up at the beginning, and then a 200 best effort, and then we did some kick drills, which you can see these peaks for here, and then we did a series of 100 best efforts, which looks like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 100 best efforts, and then a bit of a swim down at the end. So you can see all that data here. Clearly the Verity is reading really well, both being sent to the Phoenix and also recording on board. There's a couple of moments when the onboard storage peaks higher than the Phoenix, again, most likely because of Bluetooth dropout, I think, being sent. But for the most part, it's pretty spot on. Whereas the H10, I mean, the average heart rate, if you look here, it says for the entire session was 38.34 BPM, whereas with the Verity on board and the Garmin Phoenix, it's a bit closer, 120 and then 124. So the H10 recording on board, not a great result here. It wasn't something that I could compare the Verity Sense to get a sense of which one was the most accurate of the two.
And once again, I spoke to Matt. Bless heart, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate all your help on this, not being a tech reviewer of any measure. I spoke to Matt about the discrepancies with the H10, or the major discrepancies with the H10. And so he suggested a third and final test, because I can't carry on doing all this stuff and continue to not regard myself as a tech reviewer, because I am most certainly not. He suggested using some gel that you use for ECG or defibs to make sure the connection's solid, because that's clearly what the problem with the H10 was, but it was dropping out. So my third and final swim essentially was just to see if we could get a better result from the H10 for a comparison. And here's the data from that one. Okay, so just a quick note regarding test number 3. I went to the pool, I took my Finnish metronome thing, I forget the name of it, which I've done a review of years ago, and decided to do 10 100s, all at the same pace, get some heart rate data. That'd be quite interesting to look at, because they're all at exactly the same pace, same rest recovery and everything else. However, completely messed it up. Gave me a huge amount of respect for the tech reviewers that do this all the time. I managed to connect my chest strap to my watch rather than the Verity Sense, and rather than telling the Polar to record to itself, I had it being sent to my phone. Basically, just completely horsed it up. And something in my head made me think I might have done this, so I went back to my phone halfway through the session, and basically had a look to see what I'd done wrong, and tried to correct it. And this is the data I got for the last 450 meters. Honestly, getting tech reviews wrong is really good for your training, because it means you have to keep going back to the pool to do more testing because you got it wrong the first time.
And indeed, back to the pool I went, and here's the data from this. Now, I managed to get my act together and get the Verity Sense recording on board and being sent to my Phoenix, and the H10 recording correctly on board. And this is the data that we've got. So again, the purple and the blue peaks that you can see that are relatively close together are all from the Verity on board or going to the Phoenix, and this utterly useless data that we've got here, this kind of brown line being sent across here, was the H10 on board. So that was even with the ECG gel on it to make a better connection, and I had it really nice and tight, and I was wearing a tri-suit on top. So I think we can disregard the H10, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But do we get closer data regarding the Verity Sense? Well, again, it's sort of tracking, but it almost looks a little bit to me like there's a little bit of a delay in response from the, which way round is it? The onboard version seems to be slower, and I just can't see how that's possible. However, it is pretty close again. If we look at the average, disregard this middle one because that's the H10, but the Verity is saying average of around 119, and this is saying around about 116. And again, it does track. There are peaks here where the onboard version reads higher, and there are peaks here when the information being sent to the Garmin is reading higher. So let's have a think about a bit of a conclusion about this, because it's not absolutely perfect in any way. So as a summary, I would imagine it probably doesn't come as a huge surprise that the first thing I learned is that the H10 chest strap, not great for swim recording. I'm sure other people have found it absolutely fantastic, and above water on the bike and the run, I found it incredibly accurate, and I know the likes of DC Rainmaker rate it really, really highly as an accurate heart rate strap, but that isn't what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is what's in this little packet, the Verity Sense. Now, the whole reason I bought it was to use it in the pool to get accurate data. And the thing that I've got a problem with is knowing whether the data that's stored on board or the data that's being sent to my Phoenix, which one is more accurate out of the two. Okay, so logic would imply that the one that's constantly in contact and isn't having to send any data to Phoenix must be the more accurate. So if we go with that, this is why I think it's a really cool thing to have. First of all, it's the most reliable heart rate measuring that I've ever had in the swimming pool. The heart rate straps have always been a problem. The H10 absolutely highlights this for me. It's the first time I've ever actually been able to really get detailed heart rate data. Whether the Phoenix data or whether the onboard is more accurate relatively doesn't matter too much. I'm going to go with my gut instinct, I think, and think that the onboard is probably more accurate. Now, why this is cool is because for me, it means that when I send this to Garmin Connect, which is what uploads to Strava and everything else, I've got the data on my Phoenix. I don't have to worry about that, and it's going to give me some sort of impact and a physiological data as to fatigue and effort put in that week. However, if I want to look at my swim set in more detail, I can have a look on Polar Flow. Now that isn't uploading anywhere else, it's only going to have swims on there, and the data that it gives me on there, I actually really like the data fields on Polar Flow. I really like the way that they lay out where the set is and the swims that you've done and the heart rate data far more than Garmin Connect. So in terms of it just recording physiological data and amassing whatever it is you might want to measure in terms of fitness with TSS or what have you, it being sent to the Phoenix is perfect, absolutely ideal. If I want to get really involved and have a look and see if I get some test sets like T1000s and CSS tests, I can get into the Polar Flow app and actually really have a look with some real detail as to what it is. Do I think this is worth it? For me, yeah, because I'm a bit of a nerd and I like to know what's going on with my body. I'm really interested in the heart rate data and how it relates to running and cycling, for example. Now I'm getting some of that data. I'm getting a clear picture of what paces result in what heart rates in the pool at the minute, and that's something that over time I'll learn much more about. I like looking at my heart rate data and understanding what's going on with that, and with the testing that I've been doing at the lab recently with the bike and the run, that's been really helpful. Now maybe finally I'll get a bit of an insight into what's going on in my ticker when I'm in the pool. So that's the conclusion for the Verity Sense. Would I buy it again? Absolutely I would. The whole reason I bought it was for the swim stuff, and I think it's working perfectly well in that regard. Like I said, it's not a review. This is just some observations on using it in the pool. I hope it's been useful, but just remember, this isn't a tech review.